Welcome to Passwordstate training videos. My name is Lee, and today we'll be talking about the different permission models you can use in Passwordstate. This video will assume you have no experience with our software, so we'll cover the basic concepts and then we'll explore some of the more advanced features. Let's get started. If you are unaware, Passwordstate has a concept of password lists and folders. Password lists are the containers that store passwords, and folders are used to group together one or more logical password lists. An example of this could be the Windows team in an IT department has several shared password lists, each storing passwords of a similar nature. These password lists could be stored in a folder for that entire Windows team, and in turn that Windows team folder would be stored in an IT department folder. Using an example folder setup like this, you can logically build a folder structure for each team. If you apply permissions correctly, users will log into Passwordstate and they'll only see data that is relevant to their team. Now let's talk about the three different levels of permissions at your disposal, which you'll use to share out passwords. Admin permissions. This gives the user read and modify access to passwords, plus it allows them to make changes to the settings and permissions on password lists and folders. This is the highest level of permissions you can grant a user, and typically you would not give many users this level of permissions. Modify permissions. These give the user read and modify access to passwords, but they cannot make changes to settings or permissions on folders or password lists. This is the most common level of permissions that are applied. View permissions. These give the user read-only access to passwords and no ability to make changes to settings or permissions on folders or password lists. This level of permissions is usually granted to people like temporary contractors, where they need access to passwords, but you do not want to give them the ability to change them. When applying permissions, we always recommend, where possible, applying them via security groups, rather than setting access for individual users. This will help improve performance and reduce administration overhead. For this video, we have added in several security groups, and shortly we'll demonstrate how to use these. Passwordstate has two permission models, Standard and Advanced. The Standard permission model is the default option when you first install Passwordstate, and it requires you to set permissions directly on password lists. These permissions will then automatically accumulate and apply to any upper level folder if there are any. The Advanced permission model instead allows you to set permissions on the top level folder, and those permissions will filter down to any nested folder or password list. In our first demo, we'll take a look at applying permissions using the Standard permission model. Currently, I've created folders and password lists for our desktop team, Windows team, and Service Desk team. As I was the user who created these objects, I'm automatically granted admin rights to them, which means that I can see them in the navigation tree and can make any changes to them that I like. No one else at this stage will be able to see these objects in their navigation tree if they were to log into Passwordstate. By selecting the option View Permissions from the List Administrator Actions menu, I can add or remove permissions as desired for individual users or security groups. In this example, I'll give our Windows Team security group modify permissions and repeat this process for all other password lists in this folder. If we now log in as a user that is a member of the Windows Team security group, you can now see that they have modify access to all of these password lists, but they don't have access to any other team data. I'll show you another trick now to save you some time when applying permissions when using the Standard permission model. If we now go to the administration area when logged in as a security administrator, we can select the bulk permissions option, and this allows you to quickly grant access to multiple password lists at once. Our advanced permission model is an alternative way to grant permissions, and that is to apply permissions to a top-level folder, and those permissions will filter down to all nested folders and password lists beneath it. I've restored my system now back to a point in time where I have my folders and password lists set up with only my own account having access to these objects. The advanced permission model must be initiated from a top-level folder, and to enable this feature we simply edit a folder and choose the advanced option. This will run us through a quick wizard where we can adjust permissions as desired, but at this point I'll just leave the permissions as they are and then click the convert button. Now you should notice that the folder has a blue arrow icon next to it, and this indicates that it is using the advanced permissions model. We can toggle this icon on and off by pressing this button. To apply permissions to this top level folder, click the View Permissions button and set permissions as appropriate. My goal here is to give the entire IT department view-only access to the top level folder, and then each department will have modify access to all passwords under their own team folder. Now that I've granted the IT department security group view access at the top level, these permissions will filter down to all nested objects. So what I want to do here is start breaking inheritance at each department level. Once we break the inheritance, we can then readjust the permissions at that level. So I'll remove view access for the IT department and then add modify access for the Windows Team Security Group. If we repeat this process for each team, then when members from each team log in, they will still only be able to see their own team folder and all the nested password lists. Now, a reason you might want to set up the advanced permission model as opposed to the standard model is because it's set and forget. Every time a new password list or folder is created inside an advanced permission folder structure, those new objects will automatically inherit the permissions, saving a lot of administrative overhead. You can get as creative as you want, and maybe give another security group admin permissions so they can administer their own folder structure themselves, or maybe even add in a security group with view permissions. This way, all you need to do is add or remove users from security groups, and this will automatically grant or remove access for your users to data in Passwordstate. Sometimes you may not want to grant a user access to an entire password list, but rather only just one password in that list. You can do this from the Actions menu on the password of your choice. When a user is granted access in this manner, they'll be given guest permissions on the password list and any folders that password list is nested in. Permissions to individual passwords can be granted in a folder structure with the standard or advanced permission model. If a user has guest permissions on a password list, they do not see any other data in that list except for that one explicit record that you've granted them access to. If you are unaware, Passwordstate has two different password lists that you can create, shared or private. Shared lists allow an administrator to grant access to other users, whereas private lists cannot have any other permissions configured for them. Private lists are designed to hold your own personal passwords, things like bank logins, social media accounts, or maybe even personal logins to work applications. Private password lists can be created anywhere in your folder structure, and no matter how permissions are being applied in this scenario, your private list will never have their permissions modified to add any other users. Both of our permission models completely ignore private lists when applying access. It's possible to tweak permissions more in system settings to give users a bit more or a bit less control if they have view or modify access. An example of this could be, you want to allow users with modify access the ability to create folders or password lists which they normally wouldn't be able to do. Or maybe you don't want users with modify access to delete passwords. There's a few options available for you to explore if you search for the word permissions on the System Settings page. Passwordstate has a concept of security administrators. Generally, there are only a handful of accounts in the system with this level of access. A security administrator is a user who can see the administration tab and make changes to critical settings in your system. Having this role in Passwordstate is different to having admin access to password list folders and passwords. A security administrator may not have access to any data under the Passwords tab, but they can still make changes to folders and password lists, or any other system setting, from within the administration area. To finish this video, we'll just recap the topics we've explored. Passwordstate has two permission models, standard and advanced. Always use security groups if possible. Admin permissions has full control over folders, password lists, and passwords. Modify has full control just over the passwords, and View has the least amount of privileges. Permissions can also be granted to an individual password record, which gives the user guest permissions to the password list and any folder to where that password is located. You can create private lists anywhere in your system without fear of permissions being automatically added from either of the permission models. Permission functionality can be adjusted or tweaked in system settings, and security administrators don't necessarily have access to passwords in the navigation tree. I hope this helps you get your system set up and configured, and you're welcome to ask for any help if you need it. Please just email us on support@clickstudios.com.au with any questions you have. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.